Paragraph 3. It might be assumed that a nature preserve would be located in a pristine wilderness, far from the noise and pollution of the city. Well, right away, I can see this is probably going to turn into some type of contrasting paragraph where there will be a nature preserve closer to the city. So let's look for something that follows on our topic sentence well. S, but Shooter's Island, but, that's always a good way to transition right there, or contrast. A nature preserve just north of Staten Island is an exception to the rule. First topic doesn't suggest it's quite a rule, but that could fit well, S, as the first follow-on sentence. Let's check the others. Q, a pair of birdwatchers had followed one of them, I'm not sure what them is in the first paragraph, so that's not the first follow-on. T, nowadays, although there is no public access to the bird colonies on Shooter's Island, well, we haven't been introduced to Shooter's Island yet, so that's not the first follow-on. In 1974, however, it was discovered that the abandoned dry docks there had become home to many water birds. No, that's, again, specific about some birds, so that doesn't sound like it's the first follow-on to the topic sentence, which talks about nature preserves in the wilderness far from the city. R, during World War I, the 45-acre island. Well, what 45-acre island are we talking about? Clearly, it's got to be Shooter's Island, which is introduced in S, which is going to be our first follow-on sentence. But Shooter's Island, a nature preserve just north of Staten Island, is an exception to the rule. And between Q, T, U, and R as follow-ons, I'll suggest R would be the first follow-on to that. Number one, because chronologically it goes back in the timeline to World War I, which is certainly before 1974 in the other sentence, or nowadays. So let's see if that fits in other aspects of transitioning and linking the sentences. During World War I, the 45-acre island, which is referring to Shooter's Island from S, so that fits nicely, was home to a petroleum refinery and 2 shipbuilding companies. But later, Shooter's Island became a dumping ground. Okay, I like that follow-on to sentence S. So we have S, R in place, and we now have to put Q, T, and U in place to follow on with R. So this island became a dumping ground. What happened next? A pair of birdwatchers had followed one of them heading toward the island. Well, I still don't know what them is. I assume it's a bird, but we don't know that. Nowadays, although there's no public access to the bird colonies on Shooter's Island, well, we don't even know yet that there is a bird colony there, so that can't be the first follow-on. That would only leave U, and I'm going to take a chance and put it right up below R before we even read it. U, in 1974, however, it was discovered that the abandoned dry docks there had become home to many water birds. That is good, because that is in timeline after World War I, so that fits from sentence R. Sentence U, 1974, follows sentence R, World War I. However, and then the contrast here, it was discovered that these abandoned dry docks, and we just learned in sentence R at the end that this island became a dumping ground, so it was effectively abandoned, it seems. But it wasn't abandoned by the birds because dry docks that had become home to many water birds. So now we're left with Q or T. A pair of birdwatchers had followed one of them. Now we kind of understand one of them. Them probably refers to the water birds at the end of sentence U. The other option is T. Nowadays, although there's no public access to the bird colonies, well, we still don't know there are bird colonies per se. We just know there were many birds there. So I think Q is going to be the better follow-on to U. A pair of birdwatchers had followed one of them heading toward the island and found a thriving colony with nearly 100 nests. Now we're introduced to the idea that there is a bird colony on the dry docks on Shooter's Island. And that only leaves T, our concluding sentence, nowadays, and that's a good transition because we've taken ourselves from World War I to 1974 to literally the present time. Although there is no public access to the bird colonies, which, this can only follow Q, our fourth sentence, because that's where colony was introduced on Shooter's Island. Its winged inhabitants daily bring enjoyment to city dwellers who see them commuting into city parks. I like the order of paragraph 3. We started off that you can assume there would be no nature preserves near the city, But contrasting that, Shooter's Island is a nature preserve in Staten Island, and it begins chronologically in World War I. It was abandoned for a dumping ground, but in 1974, however, transitioning again, it was discovered that the dry docks were home to many water birds. And a pair of bird watchers saw hundreds of nests there. Today, there are winged inhabitants there. So, let's move on to paragraph 4. Ancient people of the Mediterranean thought that volcanoes were caused by Vulcan, the Roman blacksmith god. What's our likely first follow-on sentence for paragraph 4? From the ancient people who believed volcanoes were the result of Vulcan, the blacksmith god. Q. In the same park, Mauna Loa, at 28,000 feet above the ocean's floor, well, that really says nothing about the ancient people and their belief in Vulcan, so we'll eliminate that as a first follow-on sentence. T. Volcanoes, which were named for Vulcan, are vents in the crust of the earth from which molten lava and ash erupt. That sounds like a real possibility. Volcanoes, it indicates volcanoes were named for Vulcan, and it indicates what they are. But let's look at R, S, and U before we decide. There are dozens of active and potentially active volcanoes in the United States. No, that's more specific about volcanoes, which were just defined in T, so clearly that comes afterward. S, both of these shield volcanoes. Again, we're talking about volcanoes, and both of these, which probably refers back to R, the two different volcanoes mentioned. So that's not the follow-on sentence. U, that volcano located in Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. Okay, again, not sure what that volcano in the first sentence is, so this suggests T is clearly the follow-on sentence to the idea that ancient people thought volcanoes were caused by Vulcan. T tells us the name volcano itself came from the name Vulcan and defines the volcano as a vent in the Earth's crust from which molten lava and ash erupt. So what's the follow-on to T? In the same park? No, that's too specific. Both of these shield volcanoes? No, two shield volcanoes still were not mentioned. That volcano? I'm not sure what that volcano is in U. So clearly I think R is the obvious choice to follow T, which is further information about volcanoes. There are dozens of active and potentially active volcanoes within the United States, including Kilauea, the most active volcano in the world. So now, the follow-on to that could be, in the same park, Mauna Loa is the largest active volcano in the world. That's a real possibility, and we'll keep Q there for now because of that. Or S, both of these shield volcanoes. No, because both of these shield, we haven't introduced both volcanoes, we just introduced Kilauea last in sentence R, so S might follow Q, but it certainly doesn't follow R immediately. U, that volcano, located in Hawaiian Volcanoes National Park, has been spewing lava since 1983. Well, that looks like it might be a better follow-on to R than Q, because that volcano clearly seems to refer to Kilauea, and they tell us it's the most active volcano in the world, so U would be a natural follow-on example of why it's the most active. It has been spewing lava since 1983, or in excess of 30 years now. This leaves us only two choices, and once again down to a 50-50 decision for our scrambled paragraphs. Q or S follows in fourth or fifth place. S tells us both of these are shield volcanoes, but we still haven't been introduced to a second volcano, so that cannot be the follow-on to U. Q must be the next follow-on, and that will be our 50-50 choice. And it says, in the same park, assuming the same park, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, mentioned in U, which is the same park as Kilauea, Mauna Loa, at 28,000 feet above the ocean's floor, is the largest active volcano in the world. Now S makes more sense. We've been introduced to two volcanoes, Kilauea and Mauna Loa, and S says both of these are shield volcanoes, which means that they were formed as lava flowed in all directions from a central vent to form low, gently sloping mountains. So I like the order of paragraph 4. We're told that ancient people thought volcanoes came from Vulcan, and as a result, volcanoes were named after the god Vulcan, and it describes what a volcano is, indicates there are dozens of them, and that one that's very active is in Hawaii at the Volcanoes National Park. It's been spewing lava since 1983. That was Kilauea. And in the same park in Mauna Loa, another one is the largest active volcano in the world, and both of them are shield volcanoes. So that ordering seems to fit nicely. Let's move on to paragraph 5.